Good. So I'm Enhus, working at the Department of Criminology at the Vrije Universiteit Brussel. And my today's presentation is based on a literature study that I was commissioned by an EU project on smart lights concepts. It's a project run by engineers studying the way public lighting can be changed to reduce carbon emission. And I will first make clear the purpose of this intervention and give a small introduction on the team, and then focus on the relationship between public lighting, crime, and fear of crime, and then conclude. So the purpose of this paper that I'm presenting is, in fact, to ask the question, the initiatives that have been taken to do all kinds of interventions in lighting, which is reducing mainly, what will be the effects on it for crime and for fear of crime. And why is it so important? Because there is constantly in my domain of criminology, I get always been pushed to be very in favor of extending more lighting. There is lots of demand for it, but you see lots of cities and communities all over the globe taking initiatives to switch off public lighting permanently or temporarily. Certain hours at night, like we had an example in the last session. Dim, reducing the intensity of light sources, and mainly because of climate change, response to that. In addition to that, all these effects, specialists also point at the fact that this lighting intervention will contribute to lowering lighting pollution and affects the disturbances of sleep rhythms of children and adults, have an effect on animals and plant life, and we will be able to watch the sky. I don't have to tell you, I think you have had enough of these examples in the last day. So yeah, mainly what happens is that you get very emotional reactions, protests and action groups, and can go very far, trying to influence decision makers to turn back these kind of measures of turning off or dimming lights. Because, and the main reason is always that people fear more crime in the dark. And so I got the question from this project to look up what would be the effect if this was being done. So these emotional reactions of the public, they are not strange. Historical research have revealed that already in the early modern Europe, crime was often linked with night and its darkness. Religion played a large role in this development by making all kinds of associations, which says darkness bears a very strong but not exclusive negative association with evil, separation from God. Day and light stood for God, evil and devil were connected to darkness and the night. And evil was then associated with crimes like homicides, robberies, fights, but also with all kinds of activities like rebellion, conspiracy, meeting of secret societies, etc. So when lighting was being implemented since the 17th century in lots of big cities, you can see that in fact this new lighting was intended to promote law and order, but also to beautify. And it reflected a kind of new willingness to use the night and to reorder daily time by relaxing curfews, because we often forget that the night was often regulated by curfews. You were not allowed to go out at night. This lighting represents both an unprecedentedly congestion to the growing use of city streets after dark, and a renewed attempt to regulate and secure this nocturnal sociability. So what happened is that the lighting of cities enforced already existing views of the use of the night. On the one hand, the night was colonized by elites of the courts and cities, and the evening and nights became a time for showing off, for making pleasure and consumption in public spheres of respectable citizens. And they called themselves the illuminated. They were the ones to use the city. The night workers, prostitutes and low-class people were associated with crime and were easier to detect and discipline after implementing public lighting. So providing public lighting had a specific aim of combating crime and maintaining public order, which gave rise to the good lamp is the best police metaphor, which has often been used still now. So this connection between public lighting and crime is still present in modern times. The role of public lighting has become very prominent, a prominent way to police, in fact, the nights. In the 60s, several US local governments invested in the implementation and improvement of city lighting due to increased crime rates. And in this period, until now, in fact, street lighting was approached as a crime prevention strategy that would deter potential offenders and encourage informal social control. So for the first time, in fact, these studies were followed by, so these measures were followed by all kinds of studies. And this is what I tried to have an idea of by collecting all kinds of studies. I only took out some of them now, but it's only to show you the very different results they all have. You see, right, finding a decrease of violent robberies and assault. The other group, teen and others, didn't find any statistical evidence, and so on and so on. Painter, for example, a more recent study found strong decrease in antisocial behavior, but less in crime. What is interesting is the meta-analysis of Welsh and Farrington, who found a decrease of 21% in neighborhoods with improved public lighting of crime. But what I also found were very strong differences between US and UK. I cannot go into all these details, it's a pity, but what is interesting mainly is that they concluded also from this meta-analysis that, well, they tested the two main theories on preventing by using lighting, is it would deterrence or it could enhance informal social control. And they found that improving street lighting has an effect on crime, because of increasing community pride and informal social control, and less because of the increased surveillance and increased deterrence. So for what I was asked, what would happen when when lighting is decreased or is not present anymore. So we have very little studies on this, and the only one I know up till now is one of Steinbach, finding any effects on crime when you do reduce public lighting. Main problem is that, can we assume that the reduction of public lighting has the same effect as when we improve public lighting? Can this causal relation, can this be turned in the other way around? I'm really not sure about that. So what is the conclusion for crime? international literature is not conclusive about crime prevention effects of improved or reduced lighting. The different studies have are very difficult to compare. There are main problems in methodology and in perspectives. You have different operaalizations of crime. Different areas have been studied. There are different types of crime being used, so it's very hard to do. But I think that that probably the best synthesis of the current knowledge is formulated by Ramsay and Newton, stating that in conjunction with other measures, better lighting may help to improve an area. Indirectly, this may conceivably assist in reducing crime, although such an outcome is not guaranteed. It's not a scope for reducing crime on any broad basis simply by investing in better street lighting. So let's then go to fear of crime. It is very important to understand that both phenomena are totally different. There is no relationship between fear and fear of crime. This is what the boom in research since the coining of the concept, which is very recent, it's in the 60s. There is really a consensus that there is no relationship between both, and they both have their own dynamics and relationships. Although we can observe a worldwide decrease in crime, the experienced level of fear of crime seems to remain relatively stable, if not growing. Secondly, there is no causality found between actual experienced victimization and fear of crime. Fear of crime is mostly created by stories from other people's experiences with crime and victimization. And overall, people overestimate the least frequent crimes and underestimate the most frequent crimes. And third, since we now have lots of prevention initiatives, this can lead to the paradoxical effect of increasing the feelings of unsafety and fear of crime due to an increased awareness of some kind of risk. So all studies on fear of crime on improving public lighting concludes that it leads to lower fear of crime. Studies on reducing public lighting are again very limited. Also, they found that it makes people feel more scared. But if very small, it's not for the moment. It's not very representative studies, but there are more of them. Indicate that when you dim lighting, people don't even notice this. So there is some strange things. Really, a lot of research work still to do. So the most important variables, and I won't surprise you, that influence this experience of fear of crime are gender and age, with women and the elderly experiencing higher levels of fear of crime than men and younger people, especially in the dark. And it's incredible, if you do research on women and fear of crime, it is constantly the same results. Over 60% of them are having fear at night, which is enormous. And it's like something very constant over different parts of the world. So it's something to take very serious, I think. Anyway, fear as a result of reduced street lighting does not exclusively mean fear of crime, because citizens also fear tripping, physical injuries, or traffic accidents due to poor lighting. And these finding points, in fact, at the real big problem we face in criminology about the measurement of fear of crime. In fact, what is this? It's a large container. It has become a large container concept, and it is for the moment the subject of immense debates on what should we include in this concept, in fact. And it is misused also politically, as you probably also know. When considering fear of crime, visibility, which means being able to see what's going on in the immediate surroundings, is one of the key aspects, together with eyes on the streets or some kind of natural surveillance. Different characteristics of the environment and public lighting have an impact on this feeling of safety in public space. High levels of prospect, an open view, low levels of concealment, which is few hiding opportunities for potential offenders, and low levels of entrapment and possibility to escape are crucial elements in order to assess the situation. Other aspects, such as facial recognition, glare, and light source color, play an important role also in assessing street lighting. So for my conclusion, I think we can state that improving street light can have an effect on crime because of the attention local authorities give to a community and its living conditions, creating some recognition and pride that stimulates social cohesion and informs social control. We cannot be sure that reducing this public lighting will then lower social cohesion when we indeed take all kinds of measures like talking to the citizens, informing them, and so on, and getting some kind of consensus on what is important, a combat against crime, the climate dangers that we now are encountering, or having more security or feelings of security, because it's not even objectively, there is no reason, in fact, why people should be so scared. There is a consensus in literature that improvements in public lighting will reduce fear of crime. The built environment plays a large role in these fears that cannot always be ascribed to fear of crime itself, but contains other fears. Fears of falling, injuries, traffic, fear for the other also. The protests then on reducing public lighting should be taken serious by opening a dialogue with the citizen before implementing these kind of interventions, because fears can lead to adaptation, and they do, to adaptations in the behavior of people, not being able to live a normal life and use the night. So I think policymakers wanting to intervene in public lighting should communicate, listen to the citizens, go in a dialogue, take this very serious, and try to reach some kind of consensus on very differentiated approaches, like we learned in the last session that I attended, which was very interesting to hear. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Elisabeth. Salomé, are you over there?
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you, yeah.
Okay, let me just share my screen. Okay, is this working?
We are seeing your full presentation, yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So hi everyone, I would like first to thank the organizer and the scientific committee for letting me participate to the conference. My name is Salomé Vincent. I'm an ABD PhD student, and my research interest is on urban darkness as a space-time of creation and production of practices and appropriation of the city. In it, I'm looking for the urban half-light, mostly present in the interstices of the city. And my thesis focuses on identifying dark places in the city, then analyzing the emotions it causes. Using my research fields carried out in the city of Nantes, in the west of France, whose night I've been exploring for 4 years, My presentation today can be seen as an attempt to deconstruct the fear of the darkness in the public space. I argue that the illusion that the night is more dangerous than the day is stubborn, and the fear of obscurity can be linked to the fear of insecurity. Because the illusion is that black is dangerous is also based on the illusion that it increases insecurity. When we avoid a dark and empty street, we can get the impression that something dangerous will happen there. The fear of darkness seems like a fear of danger. But what is the nature of this perceived danger? My presentation will be divided in 3 parts. First, the fear of the night in the city, then the production of a security ideology, and finally, how to find darkness in a bright city. So in my first part, I first wonder on how fear of the night is culturally produced, and then focus on the fear that is associated with the night in the city. When I talk about my thesis, I usually get worried reactions. People worry about me wandering at night. They even worry about me studying such a gloomy subject. The previous presentation presented this topic very precisely, so I'll be fast. But we have learned to fear the night, and even more the dark night. Darkness usually refers to the lack of light, but also to the lack of visibility. Being in the dark means having no knowledge or a troubled knowledge. Education and cultural references have taught us that night is to be feared. Almost every tale narrates a story of characters that have bad encounters at night, so nothing good can come out of the night. Plus, night is so scary that pathological disorders exist, such as nyctophobia, which is a morbid fear of the night, scotophobia, fear of the darkness, ligophobia, etymologically fear of the twilight from ancient Greek, acleophobia, uncontrollable fear of the dark. So in many ways, fear of the dark invades our brain since we're 2 years old. For a kid, a drop shadow is a creature. Culturally speaking, I think that we must learn to speak about darkness differently from early childhood on, and understand it as an ally, especially in the urban places and spaces. At night, the lack of visual indications produces another city. The law of the dark is to prevent the immediate recognition of objects and situations. The slightest sensitive alterations becomes an emotional alteration when the survival of the body might be engaged. The need for vigilance becomes shifting since none of the senses seem absolutely trustworthy. At night, mental geographies are ruled by fear, fear of an assault, of an encounter, of harassment, and so on, especially when in situation of insecurity, the first accused is often the sensitive character of public space. So we point out, for example, for the insufficiency of the lighting, the lack of readability of the signs, or some other urban obstacles. In addition, fear intimately linked to the night is a tool of domination of power that uses lighting, police, and CCTV to control. The night seems especially to frighten the authorities, who increase their desire of surveillance once the night falls. This being said, I would like in my second part to discuss the production of a security ideology. So as we've seen, the night is conducive to anxiety, which grows inversely proportional to the light. Indeed, the beliefs according to which lighting and safety are related has been gradually anchored in the collective imagination. Light prevents experience of the dark. And this kind of artificial light does more than just enlighten, it monitors. It creates a space where everything is visible at first glance, where the unexpected is impossible. Nantes has decided to enlighten the path from the hangar à bananes, the most festive area, to Korkmaz, the city center, with a so-called smart lighting that points towards a single path with arrows marking on the ground. and this path is also patrolled and monitored by the police by CCTV. 80% of French medium-sized cities have set up monitoring infrastructures with an average of 50 cameras, which is twice as many as in 2010. Nantes spent 1.4 million euros for 97 cameras, monitoring 24/7. And during the recent campaign, the mayor, Johanna Roland, claims more than 4 million euros invested in equipment and soon 130 cameras deployed. However, Nantes has never suffered from any attack. Nantes has a relatively low violent crime rate, but the city nevertheless equips itself with cameras and reinforces the arsenal of spotlights already in place. So finally, CCTV seems to engage towards a paranoid model of society that plays with fears. The feeling of insecurity is exacerbated, perhaps even created, by some discourses that are based on a form of collective fear. Fear is reinforced daily by media reports, which continuously relay the presence of crime and police crime prevention, which tend to exaggerate violence. Over the long term, crime has decreased, but spread of information has fueled feelings of insecurity. According to historian Alain Lacroix, delinquency and crime are relative and evolutionary notions. So there seems to be a kind of paradox of the reality of a drop in violence and the feeling of the opposite. This helps to shape a stereotypical reading of the night as either the place of excessive partying or of crime. If I've learned anything during the past years, it's that despite the worried reactions that I get when I talk about my thesis, my body walking around the nights of Nantes is not so much a danger as a perception of a risk, a first system of self-limitation. Contrary to a widespread idea, no police statistics show that the night is more criminogenic than the day. And this whole process of reflection leads us to understand that the feeling of insecurity is wrongly considered as the result of actual crime. But it comes from mental, political, and social constructs that are far from statistic and from a concrete, quantified reality of danger. The rise of public lighting did not provide more security, and it even seems that light promotes a crime when it is thought of as a solution to crime. It allows, and I quote Sophie Moser, better visibility of potential victims and their surroundings, allows the perpetrator to better estimate the valuables that a person carries, and increased lighting could also facilitate drug deals. For example, when Roger Narboni, during a lighting experience in Nantes, only illuminates the right sidewalk, every woman decides to start walking on the left sidewalk in the dark, justifying that they can better see the danger. It seems important to remember that assaults don't necessarily take place in dark places. According to Marie-Hélène Hébert, most of the assaults take place in daylight. 90% of the rapes are happening in bright spaces. Ile Koskela has taught us that Finnish women make no difference between summer nights and winter nights in terms of danger. In Helsinki, where the summer knows little darkness and winter very long nights, Finnish women are always afraid of going out at times identified as nighttime, even though the light is still here. So if not dark, summer nights are also feared there, and it proves that more than light, it is the social behavior that at night is feared. So in the end, what counts is not the level of brightness, but the social dimension of the night. Thus, one may ask how to consent to the dark. One can consent to the dark because it eradicates any prosecution witness for the sake of energy saving, because it allows to see the star. Darkness can also play a role in helping to reduce urban stress. It is a resource for the living. All terrestrial animals need darkness. 80% of of butterflies or moths. One can also consent to darkness because it can be a refugee, an ally. It allows to hide in positions that make it possible to see without being seen. It can be a guarantee of safety. Consenting to the night means accepting to comply to the singular experiences that it makes possible. Good or bad, intimate and sensitive, it opens a space where we can finally live without witnesses. So entering the night is agreeing to initiate a deconstruction, deconstruct what we think we know, deconstruct the usual pace of everyday life, deconstruct what we think we're afraid of. It is confronting to our fears, it is turning to the interstices, it is accepting to lose some control. And deconstructing fears related to darkness allows an alternative and empowering experience of the city. Plus, let's not forget that the night is already full of night owls who are not afraid of the dark. The sensitive work protocol initiated by the Reclaim the Night movement in Leeds in 1977 already tackles fear as a social, sociological, and historical construct, and as an instrument of domination. So in order not to live in a paralyzing fear and reluctant to boost self-esteem and to fight against fear and violence, caring for yourself and caring the city must become an ethical and political issue, so that forms of cooperation can be organized to face the feeling of insecurity. The challenge for the city seems to me to lie in the redefinition of common spaces, leaving breaches that leave room for improvisation so that all the expressions of the night remain possible. The conservation of hollowness of the city also makes possible a form of soft resistance to grid standardized and trivialized cities. To conclude, have we seen an anthropological fear of the dark and in the dark persists? No police statistic confirm that darkness promises danger. The feeling of insecurity does not result from the application of policies, but rather seems to be the fruit of many social constructions that are spatially translated. It is generated by social injunctions. Like the researcher, the city must enter into an apprenticeship at night, develop new night visions, mentally and psychologically readjust to wanderings in the dark night. My research field in dark places requires to jump off the beaten track in an interlocked night that is in isolated, narrow, and scarce places. My work in the dark is digging into a wasteland of space and time that can bring a lot to geography. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Salomé. So now it's time for Nikhaela.
Hello, can you hear me?
Pretty well, indeed. Yeah.
Good. Okay. So hello everyone. I thought I'd start by giving an introduction to myself. So my name is Nikhaela. I'm a criminologist and a lecturer at the University of Portsmouth currently. And this presentation is based upon my PhD research at the University of Westminster. And the research explores how race is produced through the policing of nightlife specifically. So when I say that I'm looking at policing, I explore both the public police, so uniformed police officers who work on behalf of the state, and also the private police, so those who operate with less oversight by the state, such as door staff and venue managers. So my PhD research raises broader questions regarding how race influences how nightlife is produced, managed, accessed and experienced. And I'm in the final phase of writing up and I'm hoping to submit my PhD by the end of this year. So as part of my research, I conducted an ethnography in an area that I've anonymised and I've called Greenshire. And this involved observations and interviews with police officers, nighttime licensing officers, door staff, venue managers, street pastors, and taxi drivers. I also observed a range of nighttime economy meetings, which were attended by a wide range of nighttime actors. They were primarily led by police officers or street pastors in the UK. And as part of my research, I conducted 34 interviews with my research participants and conducted discourse analysis of the police diversity agenda in Greenshire. So today my presentation is going to focus specifically on one area of my research, which draws attention to the normative exclusion of gypsy and travellers from nightlife in Greenshire. So I reveal how this exclusion is upheld in numerous ways through dress code policies, historical door practices, CCTV surveillance, and also more implicit understandings that are shared between the public and private police. So before I go into more detail with my specific research findings, I want to provide you with a very brief flavour of what Greenshire is like, as well as outline what I mean by gypsy and travellers. So Greenshire is a provincial context in the south of England. Over 90% of residents describe themselves as white British in the last census, and a smaller percentage of residents are black or minority ethnic. Most notably of those, they are Pakistani, Bangladeshi and black African from census data. There's a small percentage of white ethnic groups, specifically those from Eastern Europe, as well as gypsy and travellers themselves. So the area has seen a marked reduction in the number of nightclubs, bars and pubs in the last decade. There are two main areas though which remain known for their nighttime high streets. So they are the places that people travel across Greenshire to come to, or travel from outside of Greenshire to come to. They are where I based most of my observations. And the venues in these two nighttime areas are much more mainstream than they are niche, and they cater for a predominantly white, local and largely heterosexual clientele. So Gypsy and Travellers specifically are a predominantly white ethnic group, and they were first traced in the United Kingdom approximately 1,000 to 1,500 years ago, although the literature demonstrates no accurate account. Originally, they were noted in Greenshire for the first time for providing temporary labour on farms before traditional farm work disappeared following the Second World War. Many Gypsy and Travellers have settled in Greenshire in houses following the decreasing work, moving from caravans and trailers. In the UK, importantly, Gypsy and Travellers are now described as an ethnic group and are protected from discrimination by the Equality Act, which was outlined in 2010. So I became aware throughout my ethnography quite quickly that the exclusion of Gypsy and Travellers from nightlife was a normal part of policing nightlife. So during an interview with Caleb, these are all kind of fake names, fake venue names, etc. He was a venue manager at a place I've called Teasers. He told me that Gypsy and Travellers are referred to as no-nos at night. And this label literally represents that the no that the group receive on the door to all nighttime venues. So Caleb shares with me during an interview, travellers seem to be a big problem in this area. We had a group on Saturday we were told not to let in because you've got CCTV in town as well. The CCTV operators told us on the radio. They were coming from one bar, they were refused entry, they then got refused at another bar, and then a club, refused entry at all three. Unfortunately, I'm not being racist against travellers, but we tend not to let them in. So in Greenshire, nighttime radios and CCTV cameras would be used to detect the whereabouts of Gypsy and Travellers specifically, and their location and appearance would be communicated through the nighttime radios that were used by the private police, so that this group could be declined access on the door of nighttime venues. So the communication on these nighttime radios would literally be the sentence, recommended no-no, hence the label. Dress code policies were also framed in very explicit ways, which allowed for the exclusion of Gypsy and Travellers at the door. So I've got some kind of diary note reflections in this slide, which I think are important to share and demonstrate how dress code policies and also how kind of moving in large groups were problematised by both the public and private police. So following one night of observation alongside a police officer, I reflected in my research diary. I saw numerous signs in the windows of nightclubs tonight which stated no heavy jewellery, no vests, no hats, no heavy rings, and no joggers. Scott, who was a police licensing officer that I conducted a number of observations alongside, said that these dress code policies are ways of saying no travellers, please. I asked Scott how or if Gypsy and Travellers navigate these dress codes, and Scott said that this group mainly goes out during the week when they know that their businesses want their money. So maybe these dress codes are being applied much more heavily on the weekends to exclude this group. So Gypsy and Traveller women were essentialised by my research, participants for wearing heavy makeup and short dresses. Gypsy and Traveller men were said to wear scruffy work attire and heavy gold jewellery. The group were also problematised, as I said, for moving in large groups and crowds and refusing to listen to authority. So they were essentialised in this way through this stereotype. So I spent some of an evening alongside someone I called Catherine, who was a volunteering paramedic, and recalled the following. So Catherine explained the main group that they have problems in dealing with at night is travellers. She said when one hurts themselves, the whole group gathers around, talking over each other and talking over her when she is trying to speak with the injured person. She said the men are ridiculously protective of traveller women when they hurt themselves, and they push her to get information on what is going on. Catherine said this makes it hard to deal with the incident in the moment, as it gives her little time to think. So far in my presentation, I've evidenced how Gypsy and Travellers suffer from a stereotyping which impacts their access to nighttime venues in Greenshire. In this section of my presentation, though, I want to think about how nightlife in the area that I observe specifically here is constructed around the ideals of whiteness. So firstly, before we think about whiteness, I believe that whiteness needs to be deconstructed, as the benefits and privileges of whiteness do not equally benefit all white groups. So Volpal refers to forms of acceptable and unacceptable whiteness, arguing that Gypsy and Travellers represent what she calls a non-acceptable whiteness. So she states, a particular kind of whiteness is privileged and protected. Whiteness attributed to Gypsy and Traveller communities is a form of non-acceptable whiteness, which does not have the same status or privilege accorded to those from white middle-class backgrounds. So far in my presentation, I've evidenced that acceptable whiteness at night is constructed around the following. So dressing in non-workman attire, i.e. not looking like you are have been working on a building site, wearing smart shoes, smart trousers, limiting kind of heavy gold jewellery particularly. It also is constructed around moving in smaller groups or pairs, and stuff around accent, tone and speech is also incredibly important to those boundaries of acceptable whiteness. So speaking in a Southern English accent and waiting for your turn to speak when you are speaking with authority was incredibly important to how you were responded to by both the public and private police at night. I also found during my observations that dancing, so keeping your movements quite limited, keeping to your own personal space, dancing in smaller groups rather than very large groups, queuing, so making sure that you queue in an orderly fashion to get in entry into a nightclub, and drinking, so drinking the right kinds of alcoholic drink and the right amount of drink, all informed those boundaries of acceptable whiteness. Okay, so through the study, I found that the public police, so those uniformed police officers who work for the state, did acknowledge the racism towards Gypsy and Travellers at night. So the public police have training, which is based upon the Equality Act. They are made aware that Gypsy and Travellers are considered an ethnic group and that this protects them or should protect them from discrimination. However, regardless of this, the public police supported the exclusion of Gypsy and Travellers in the nighttime economy, whilst also stating that this was in fact racism. So sometimes the public police were called to complaints of racism from Gypsy and Travellers who were complaining against usually door staff and venue managers. So during an interview, Laura, a police officer, shared with me, "I've had travellers approach me complaining of not being allowed into nightclubs. We did tell them to make sure that they logged it. You don't know the ins and outs. She was quite loud, and as much as you could chat to her and ask what they said directly, she was just like, no, it's because I'm this and it's because I'm that." And it's like, well, they've said that. So, well, they've not said that, so it's very hard for us to confront them. And then William, who was a police licensing officer, said, "I've had allegations against door staff refusing travellers because they were travellers. I haven't been able to confirm it one way or another because when you speak to the doorman, they're not going to admit it. There are certainly allegations made, but you have to remember that people get rejected from a club, they get embarrassed, and sometimes they might just say things." So these quotes reveal that when complaints of racism are made, despite Gypsy and Travellers being protected by that Equality Act, they are in fact blamed by the public police for the exclusion that they face at night. Laura does this by stating she was quite loud and they were a loud group anyway. However, as you can imagine, through our observations, I observed a large number of nighttime participants who were loud, who were heavily intoxicated, that were accessing bars and nightclubs. But these nighttime participants appeared to be white, British, and local. William dismisses complaints of racism by constructing these as tactics which aid Gypsy and Travellers in saving face. So both the public and private police therefore maintain the exclusion of Gypsy and Travellers from nightlife due to fixed stereotypes of this ethnic group. The ethnicity of the nighttime participant and their associated behaviours, embodiments, practices and performances is therefore absolutely central to their access to nightlife in Greenshire. So in summarising my presentation, I just want to finish by finalising my thoughts. This presentation evidences how a racialised gaze, a term coined by Richardson in 2006, works both explicitly through the use of CCTV cameras, nighttime radio systems, and dress codes, which work to exclude Gypsy and Travellers, but also more implicitly too, through a shared understanding between the public and private police that this ethnic group are entirely problematic to nightlife. Secondly, Gypsy and Travellers have an ambiguous relationship to whiteness. Firstly, due to their white ethnic identity on the one hand, but secondly, due to their unacceptably white behaviours, dresses and forms of embodiment at night. This means that they're, as both Paul says, they're not quite white enough to gain access to the main nighttime high streets in Greenshire. Finally, I want to finish by stating that the private operating practices of nighttime venues means that these discriminatory actions are very hard to challenge. So the public police are policed both internally and externally, but the actions of door staff, venue managers, CCTV operators, and so on continue to remain unpoliced. As nightclubs are privately owned, venue managers are able to create these dress code policies and operate historical discriminatory door practices without these being scrutinised. whilst door staff and venue managers have the relevant licenses to operate and work in the UK. The training for these licenses I found through interviews with door staff specifically is not informed by any understanding of race, ethnicity and discrimination. Thank you for everyone for listening, and I wanted to say thank you to Emmanuel and Jordi for putting together a great conference. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much. So now we are slightly changing a little bit the topic. Now we are going to the events, and I would like to invite to speak. I'm not quite sure how you're going to organize yourselves, girls. So Irem, Yesim, and Etse, you are the next speakers. So go ahead and take our screen off.
Okay, I'm sharing. Can you see it?
Perfectly.
Okay. So we are a group of 3, and I'm putting off my camera because in order to have proper connection. Okay. We are a group of 3, me, Irem, and Ece, and we will be talking in a row. And we'll be talking about dark nights, darker days, degrees of the night in Dolapdere Burglars Market in Istanbul. So night is a natural phenomenon, yet it is not possible to correlate the same naturalness with night spaces. Night spaces mediate human practices in controlling and appropriating the darkness of the night or attributing new meanings to them. It creates a radical tolerance area by defining public and temporal thresholds. So when night is identified as the end of the day, a retreat, avoiding 24-hour period, it generates learned helplessness that we imprison ourselves into daily routines, where we can easily be controlled, monitored, or regulated. It turns into a scene that is spatially and temporally emptied, amplifying what authority wants to make visible and absorbing what is to be covered. Spatial definitions and characters that change via time layer transform the subject of the architecture at first hand. By settling into infrastructures and social judgments that are evacuated at night, temporary spatial interventions may provide new meanings and functions, reminding people that they have an active say in the spaces they live. So we depart with a taxi from Şişhane to Dolapdere. It must be a little past 11 p.m. We don't know the exact address, but we heard that it is somewhere behind the Apik tripod. These hints do not help the taxi driver that much, but yet we keep moving. Not long before we get out of the taxi, we realize that we have already passed the market. Our alien eyes cannot distinguish the camouflaged market in the texture of the night yet. We ask for directions at a gas station. Probably assuming that we are not able to walk down the street at that hour of the night as young girls, we immediately rush into another taxi. We drive a 2-minute walk distance by taxi, accompanied by our new driver, the guy at the gas station. When we are about to be embarrassed by his benevolence, we face off with the heavy bill charged for our encounter that lasts only 4 seconds, including some safety things along the way. This bill is a reminder of pellicular codes and dynamics of the area at the same time. Concepts of reliability, distances, and the way we are perceived from outside begin to blur after that point. Just at the intersection of these discussions, Dolapdere Burglars Market in Istanbul is the bodily state of relationships between identity, authority, body, and spatiality that are moving in the possibilities offered by the course of the night. A new hyper-real urban scenario emerges every Saturday night when the dark descends in Dolapdere streets and the Burglars Market exists until the first light of the following day. The fact that the sold goods are stolen objects and the sellers are mostly thieves, it builds a slippery layer of legitimacy specific to the place and time. With its wide product scale ranging from reuse to drills, from electronics to diapers, burning fires, hanging flags, and street vendors that's selling food, it has been transformed into a performance that displays cross-sections from daily lives of Istanbul. Detached from many different everyday lives and brought together on the same plane, these objects resemble to amputated organs. They both belong and not belong to one at the same time. They were withdrawn from the flow in which way they belong. Meanwhile, luxurious hotels, plazas, and private hospitals in the heart of Taksim, which can be easily followed seconds by seconds from the side of the streets, undertake the role of a film set where legitimate Istanbul realities are presented simultaneously. Due to the topography, those contrasting realities are superposed in the urban scene of Dolapdere. Likewise, the other side of the street hosts steep stairs where the topography rises with a sudden slope. When looked from these stairs, we prevail a wider scene. The night, on the one hand, allows burglars market to settle in a spatiality that produces and distorts itself away from authority and control, and on the other hand, it allows the skyscrapers rising behind the market to raise their messages with a light intensity that crushes the human scale for the sake of making themselves visible in the city.
We're daunted by the very first minutes that we spend in the market. We are fully aware of the eyes pointed towards us and the pickpockets following us. The street is so dense and so narrow that people cannot proceed without touching each other. It is as if the circumstances of the market are optimized for the ideal burglary scene. We pass by the shirts hanging on the walls of the Evangelista Greek church. Baby doll houses are sold next to second-hand dentures, packaged food, shoes, even second-hand underwear and urinals. We move as one merged body. One of us checks the boots while the others check the pickpockets. The vendors use the opportunities of the night and increase the capacity of the booths by hanging goods on the iron balustrades. Ironically, they were built for preventing burglary, but anyways, the ropes they were stretched on the facades of the buildings, stairs of houses, warehouses, and gas stations that are unoccupied during the night. The actors of the new reality produced within the market are criminals who sell stolen goods, refugees, gypsies, hipsters, enthusiasts, adventure seekers, or architecture students who come here with the intention of conducting an academic research, economically disadvantaged families, minorities, and thieves waiting in ambush to rob visitors of the market. The criminals of the day become the vendors of the night. We realize that the more we make eye contact with the pickpockets, the less we are being followed. Flames in the middle of the street, booths occupying the gas station, chandeliers, extended families, extraordinary dialogues. This irrational setting we are in brings us to the state that we don't seek for any meaning no longer. This intense meaninglessness offers a new reality that allows different marginal experiences to take place and marginal identities to be included. The groups that are marginalized and claimed as disreputable by the society instrumentalize this meaninglessness and open up space for their existence. As we spend more time around the booths, we get more comfortable with the crowd. We feel at ease enough to talk about the country's issues with some of the vendors, joke, bargain, and even accept chocolates offered by the vendors. And we start to feel guilty about our prejudices and alienating judgments. Yet, being aware of the fact that some pickpockets still try their chance and cross us over and over again, we still hold on to that feeling in danger. Here we can't trust neither the environment, nor the people, nor the objects. This uncanny state of in-betweenness is what draws us in the experience. The construction of a new temporal spatiality interval, away from the authority and not intervened by the police, the fact that the goods sold are stolen objects and the sellers who are in fact criminals, build a new layer of legitimacy specific to the place and time. People who are identified as thieves and avoided by the visitors during the daytime turn into vendors with whom people have daily conversations, bargain, and talk about worldly affairs on Saturday nights. This normalized atmosphere produces its own urban tactics and spatial language. This is our second time in the market, being more experienced, and we alienate the environment and the people less and less, and thus we get familiar with new details about the market. While looking at shoes on a booth in front of a house, we see a woman who ran towards us from her living room, which is notably visible from the open door of the house. She takes care of the booth that we stand nearby. While the sound of the TV series she is watching inside spills over the street, and we witness this extraordinary Saturday experience of us to be transformed into daily routines of others. Vendors are not as marginal as we expected. There are older women, people with disabilities, young children, and extended families among them. The goods on sale have already been replaced with the new ones since our last visit. Since we feel more comfortable to stay longer this time, we recognize food trucks in front of the church. Its temporal speciality with the stool and tables contribute to the transformation of the street's urban rhythm. The cooking smoke is accompanied by small controlled fires set by some vendors for warming. We move forward and reach the crossroads in front of the gas station, already transformed into a small piazza with old women making pancakes on the road and children playing around them in the night. They take us even deeper in the surreal atmosphere we're in. We still catch many pickpockets' eyes, and those who noticed our bags hidden beneath our coats are skipping us and moving towards other buyers.
These unique special languages and codes produced by the burglar market drive a unique bodily experience. It sometimes emerges from hand signs, sometimes from body languages or face expressions. But in general, these building codes gather under the same roof of Dolapdere on Saturday night. We can say that what constructs this hyper-real urban scenario, besides the identities and the space itself, are physical movements, distinctive hand signs and gestures, and flows which are created spontaneously and indigenous to Dolapdere night. For example, the benches laid on the ground on both sides of the street, near the street, and define the way the market is visited on a line of two strips running in contact with each other and flowing. People wandering around the market must bend over to see the items sold. As the person bends over, he creates a new orientation for the flow of people coming after him. This bending positions and turning one's back to crowd allow pickpockets to open to being robbed. While people are coming to the market because stolen goods are sold, they also put themselves potential for thieves. In other words, our physical and identical positions here are not constant. It continues to flow with the crowd in the space. You cannot predict where your conversation would go on with the sellers, whereas we can more or less guess the conversation flow with the waiter as soon as we enter the restaurant that we are used to visit. The hierarchy is collapsing as positions change and boundaries are becoming blurred constantly. Moreover, the pickpockets waiting in the corners lay eyes on the people who have turned their attention to products and are certain that they carry a certain amount of money with them because they come here for shopping. By creating a crowd around them, the pickpockets are trying to rob them without being noticed. This theft-prone situation also creates its own relative security order. For the continuity of the market, actions such as extortion, violence, and forced detention cannot be carried out in the market, even if it is an environment where criminals are the majority. Since such events are not supported because buyers will cut their feet from the market, the only legitimate stealing method is pickpocket. Thus, a defense area is created where people can develop their individual safety tactics against the following pickpockets. People who wander at Dolapdere thief market, which defines a reality where it can only settle in the darkness of the night. The mutual sidewalks of Neriman Street, which is chosen to be settled on it, are included in the borders of different municipalities. Although security forces are aware of their existence, but do not often intervene intervene to keep the level of crime in the city at a certain level. Sellers take refuge in the legal domains of these local municipal borders. When the crew of Şişli municipality arrive, they get rid of punishment by building up on the sidewalk within the borders of Beyoğlu, using their legal rights granted to them. When the crew of Beyoğlu municipality arrive, the address is other sidewalk. In this respect, the topography where the market is established also stands out and acts as a natural harbor that creates escape points to be sheltered in possible interventions. A few months after both market experiences, we are together to compose this text. We are aware that what makes such a topic writable is because we are not yet in an academic position, and we try to increase our view of the subject as much as possible using the same position. The fact that the text reflects the observations and inferences of three people also begins to liberate the author of the article. On account of our architect position, we can use lines as much as words as a tool for research and thinking. We are deprived of all other positions that we are not architects. We think that we can convey our ideas more dissolutely because of this writing attempt in the light of sight writing and situated knowledges. This text, which we intervene in its integrity and present in two streams, helps us to write a little more than what the academic language is cracking and filtering. On the one hand, we open our own position to criticism by presenting the arguments we suggest and for what reason we present them. The fact that the knowledge and we produce involves many subjectivity in different situations brings it closer to objectivity. On the other hand, from the same point of support, we are aware that this text has taken on this shape due to the fact that we have been making intensive reading on sight writing and situating knowledge for a while. Burglar Bazaar displays one of these possible night scenarios in the city without domesticating the night and daying it, which repeats this reality every week a few streets beyond the ideals of hygienic and gentrified space created by the authority. We watch the identity, moral and legal codes produced by our daily lives become slippery, ambiguous and intervened, both thanks to what the market offers and arouses in us. Numerous radical events and identities that coexist and overlap here allow more free forms of expression in the public sphere. The authority are aware of the burglars market and victim knows. We are eaten now and the situation fits all of us. Thanks for the listening. And that's end of our presentation, and we are open to questions from all.
Teşekkür ederim.
Rica ederiz.
But we still have one person to talk, that is Ilaria. Ilaria, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, great. Actually, it's two of us presenting. It didn't appear in the program, but it's myself and my colleague Adam who is there as well. Adam, show us your hand so we know where you are. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen so that I can present my PowerPoint. Share screen, here it is, and that's that. Share. Okay, do let me know if you cannot see this. Okay, good evening. We are at almost at the end of a long day. So I hope that the cheerful and happy subject will encourage you to stay awake during this presentation. And also I'm going to present with Adam, so we will alternate and that hopefully will keep you awake as well. So our presentation, it seems a bit strange perhaps to talk about Christmas right now with possibly 30 degrees outside or something, not here in London, but elsewhere. It is July, but our research is about Christmas, in particular Christmas in London and the night. And I will tell you a little bit more about this in a moment. But I would like first to introduce ourselves. So this is us. We both work at the University of Westminster. I'm in the School of Architecture and the Built Environment, and my colleague Adam works in sociology. But we both have common interests. My work is especially around tourism and city tourism, especially tourism in London, off the beaten track tourism in London. And Adam's interests are around the night in terms of belonging, community, and spatial and temporal changes. So this research that we're going to present here really brings together my interest and Adam's interest. It started with a book chapter that we wrote in a book that you can see here in my presentation that is called Destination London. Is a book about tourism in London. And the book chapter was around the exploration of themes related to Christmas-themed events and spaces in London. And you're probably wondering what this has to do with the nights, but I'm going to explore that in a bit more depth in a moment. But before we do that, I would like to pass the microphone to Adam, who will tell you a little bit more about London and London's policy in terms of the night. So, Adam, it's up to you.
Thank you, Ilaria. So there has been, of course, quite a lot of interest in the night, about the night in London for quite some time now, largely in terms of the sort of familiar debates about the nighttime economy. And of course, a lot of this has we've seen a lot of discussion about the night in London, largely in relation to narratives of loss, things closing down, noise and conflicts between residents and revellers, particularly about the closure of venues, nighttime venues, and of course LGBTQ+ venues, as Ben and Lo talked about yesterday. And also, of course, debates about the night in regards to gentrification, around access, inclusion, and inclusion as well. And partly in response to this, then the GLA, or the Greater London Authority, have commissioned a number of reports and commissioned quite a number of research projects as well, basically looking into the night, largely in relation to questions of creativity, tourism, and transport. And out of this, then, they have also produced things like the Night Tsar position, the 24-hour tube that now runs on weekends, and of course, as well, the promotion of new nighttime areas and new policies as well to try and stem the closure of some important community spaces. But while there's been a fairly general discussion then about diversity at night, and about trying to expand London's nighttime availability as well. There hasn't been a tremendous amount on families, which is quite interesting, and there's certainly been nothing on Christmas either. There has, like I said, been a general theme in nighttime policy in the UK for quite some time now about trying to expand and diversify, which is often coded in very white, very middle class terms. But we haven't really seen a great deal of discussion about families in London, which is kind of interesting because, as Ilaria will go on to now, Christmas period is a time which of course does attract a number of families and very diverse communities into London at night.
Okay, thank you, Adam. So, linking to what Adam was saying about policy in London, we decided to explore especially those 3 months between November and January, where there are quite a lot of events that are inspired by Christmas and also spaces that are themed around Christmas. And what we're going to discuss in this paper is what we explored in the book chapter that I mentioned, but also some plans for actual empirical research that we would like to conduct next Christmas if the pandemic allows us to do it. So why we're so interested in Christmas in particular, what we're interested in is how these events in a way expand and extend the tourism experience. And that happens in a number of ways, which are also related to the night. So one way in which they extend the Christmas experience is that, of course, the Christmas will be maybe 1 day or 1 week, but these events tend to start in November and they go on until January. So in a way, the Christmas season is extended, which is quite important in terms of tourism, because many visitors come to London to attend those events or for shopping or just to soak up the Christmas atmosphere. But also, this is what we find especially interesting for this particular paper, they extend the tourist experience and the leisure experience also of the residents in London, not just tourists, into the night. And the night is especially important for Christmas. And I think here we link to some of the earlier presentations that were talking about lights. Lights are very important. Illuminations and Christmas trees are very important at Christmas. So as a consequence, and also because there are so many hours of darkness in London at Christmas and in those 3 months, nighttime experiences and events are particularly important for these events. So we are especially interested in events. Just to give you some examples, the switching on of the illuminations. You know, Christmas illuminations, they are usually placed in shopping streets, but now there are specific events where the illuminations are switched on, and you can see some pictures in my slides of those events, which are quite big. And then, of course, there are other Christmas spaces like ice rinks, like you can see in the pictures. And then Christmas markets, some of which are particularly famous, like you see in these pictures. Winter Wonderland happens in Hyde Park every year, and it's a themed park, essentially themed around Christmas and the Christmas festivities. So we're especially interested in these events, in these spaces, because we think that perhaps they offer an alternative in terms of leisure to traditional nighttime experiences that are often related to drinking, going out, clubbing. These events tend to be a little bit more family oriented and oriented to a type of leisure experience which might attract different audiences from the traditional clubbing and bars. So one of the key issues that we want to explore with this research is whether those places are truly inclusive. Because of course, in terms of religious background, yes, they are not oriented towards alcohol, but of course they are linked to Christmas, which is a Christmas tradition, okay, which is a Christian tradition. So we wonder to what extent those events and those spaces are actually truly more inclusive in terms of different audience from different religious backgrounds, but also different sexual backgrounds, and in terms of age groups, including younger people, older people, families, and so on. The other type of event that we're also interested in is illumination events, such as light night events. So in London, there was a light night event called Lumiere that took place in 2018 and in 2016 in January. So again, it was another event that was very much aimed at extending the Christmas season and also taking advantage of the nighttime, the darkness, and creating illuminations around the city. There was another event that was planned this year around illuminations in London, but I think it was cancelled because of coronavirus. But anyway, the illumination events are also very interesting for us because as part of the Mayor of London's 24-hour London vision, there is a specific intention to invest in this kind of events specifically as an alternative to the traditional drinking cultures of leisure spaces at night. So for this reason, we are especially interested in this kind of illumination events as well. But I'm going to pass the microphone back to Adam, because there are also issues related to the use of public space of many of these events and spaces, and Adam will tell you a little bit more about that.
So one of the obviously the more perhaps obvious issues, but also very contentious one, is about the use of public spaces. So Winter Wonderland, for example, takes over quite a large part of Hyde Park, effectively taking over the space for 2 months. Winter Wonderland is perhaps now one of the most popular London themed spaces at Christmas. It's attracted over 14 million people since it first opened in 2007. So whilst this would suggest a certain degree of appeal, it's also attracted a great deal of controversy for the fact that it occupies so much of Hyde Park, and it commercialises and is believed to, what some would say, vulgarise a very large part of the public park. So Winter Wonderland raises lots of other issues which you might be familiar with in terms of the theming and the theme environment literature, such as the faux Bavarian market of it, the focus on shopping, and whilst the ship has probably long sailed, also about the commercialization of a religious event. Finally, it's important to say that many of the Christmas events that happen are in areas, though, that are already very, very commercial, and where shopping and entertainment are their key feature anyway. So the Christmas lights on Oxford Street don't necessarily commercialise it because it's already one of the most popular shopping streets in the UK. It's also worth mentioning as well that many of the events are free. So Winter Wonderland is horribly expensive for the rides, but it is free to go in. And there are also carol singing, switching on of the lights, and those things as well. That doesn't erase, though, the other important questions about this event, and particularly about the ways the space is used, by whom, and how we might possibly imagine other ways of celebrating the winter months. And there's also just a final point to make about how they are managed. In our earlier research, in the research that Ilaria and I did, we couldn't actually pin down any single authority or any single person who coordinates Christmas events in London. So there's not actually any single policy. It's not administered by any one group. Instead, the events are created by multiple actors, multiple tiers of governance, from business improvement districts, private organisations, local community groups, charitable groups, and of course, residents and individuals as well, who choose, I guess, to engage within this kind of celebratory atmosphere, wearing reindeer hats or Father Christmas hats as well. And finally, then, the coming together of multiple events over this 2-month period is also quite interesting and notable, starting with Halloween and Bonfire Night, Christmas at the centre of this, but also extending into New Year and the Lumiere Festival as well. But again, questions do emerge around this, around issues of inclusivity, not just about who participates, but also leads, and what stories are getting told at this period. And again, it's worth emphasising that really we're referring to here something which has really happened over the past decade, where we've really seen this coming together of a kind of single Christmas narrative in London over that 2-month period. So it raises questions about what stories are included, what stories are not included, what exclusions might be happening, and also, very finally, to what extent these actually reflect London's multiculturalism as well.
So just to conclude, based on the initial paper that we wrote, in which we presented some of these themes and some of the interesting themes that have emerged from that research, including inclusivity, the commercialization of spaces, authenticity, we want to now try and conduct some empirical research, because the previous paper was based on our own reflections on the literature mainly. And we would like to actually do some research during those events and attending those Christmas spaces. And the kind of questions that we would like to answer through the research are these winter festive events and spaces really inclusive, and how are these theme spaces and events experienced by different space users, including people from a varied range of religious, ethnic, age, and sexual backgrounds. So these are some of the key questions that we would like to pursue through the research. And the kind of methods we would like to use are interviews with participants, but perhaps also non-participants from a variety of ethnic and religious backgrounds, as well as our own observations.
Sorry, I just wanted to say as well, when we're talking about the experience, we are of course also talking about fun and the spatialization of fun and pleasure as well.
Yeah. So the kind of questions that we had for the audience, if there is time, is, you know, any advice, since we still have to actually conduct empirical research, any advice would be welcome, and comments. And also if you have any ideas how we could manage the research if we're not allowed to do any field work, because at the moment our university is not allowing anyone to do any kind of field work that is not just desktop online research. Thank you for listening, and I think it's time for questions now.